Welcome back, Defenders. Jake here. Yesterday in my update video, I mentioned Robert F. Kennedy Jr., and I was not prepared for the strong reactions I got in the comments section. People left me comments such as this. Your snide little comments about RFK Jr. being a Russian paid operator are total BS, Jake. Are you serious? Grow up, dude. Biden needs to drop out anyway, and then RFK can easily beat Trump. So let's first talk about RF Kennedy Jr. He's running for president as a Democrat. And in my opinion, he is not qualified to be president of the United States. He's never served in the military, he's never held elected office, and given his wealth, privilege, access, and name recognition, he is severely underperformed in life. Doesn't mean he's a bad person, but as a veteran, I don't think he's qualified to be Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces. And in my update video, I mentioned RFK Jr. deleted a campaign photo after it was apparent that there were Russians in the picture. So this is a photo of a Russian woman inside of Russia, and RF Kennedy Jr. tweeted out how real Americans should join his campaign. For me, this is all the evidence I need that there are Russians working on his campaign, helping him make material. American graphic designers or whatever don't accidentally use stock photographs of Russian women in Russia. But that's not enough for you guys. So we're going to talk about RFK Jr. and everything he's said and what he stands for concerning the war in Ukraine. But first, who is RFK Jr.'s base of support? And it's mostly conspiracy theorists. People such as Alex Jones and Steve Bannon, they love RFK Jr. They're pushing this guy like crazy on their programs. So I don't think any actual elected Democrats to national office are choosing to support RFK Jr. He's not going to win the Democratic primary. The goal is just to try and weaken Biden and then launch RFK Jr. as a third-party candidate to siphon votes away from the Democrats. When in reality, given a lot of his positions, he's more likely to siphon away votes from people who maybe support Trump, given Trump's closeness with Steve Bannon and Alex Jones. There's also the bizarre QAnon conspiracy community, and they're obsessed with the Kennedy family. They believe JFK Jr. is still alive or he's going to come back from the dead. I don't really understand the QAnon conspiracy community here in the United States, but they hear Kennedy and they get excited. But let's actually talk about RFK and things he said. YouTube removes RFK Jr.'s video featuring bizarre claim that polluted water makes children transgender. RFK Jr. claims chemicals in the water are turning boys trans. I mean, if you really need me to continue, I will continue, but he said this. He believes this. He thinks chemicals in the drinking water are turning people transgendered. Let's talk about Ukraine. RFK Jr. says, let's be honest, it's a U.S. war against Russia. Kennedy Jr. criticizes U.S. role in Ukraine, calls it a proxy war with Russia. U.S. involvement, the United States helping Ukraine, is terrible for the Ukrainian people. RFK Jr. believes all military aid and assistance to Ukraine should stop, and Ukraine should capitulate to the Russians or concede territory, give Russia everything they want. This is his stated position. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. wildly claims that Russia acted in good faith with their Ukrainian invasion. All of the justifications that Russia gave for invading Ukraine, Nazis and biolabs and NATO expansion, all of it's real. everything the Kremlin says is true. The Kremlin is 100% justified in their invasion of Ukraine. That is RFK Jr.'s position. Here's TASS, the Russian news agency. Robert Kennedy Jr. acknowledges U.S. has biolabs in Ukraine. So the genetically engineered mosquitoes are real. The viruses infecting birds to go after Russian Slavs, it's all real, according to RFK Jr. This is what the Russians are reporting to their people, that a guy running for U.S. president supports and believes everything they say in the Kremlin. So because RFK Jr. is controversial, of course, YouTubers are going to have him on their podcast, and they're going to promote him. RFK Jr. was on the Joe Rogan Podcast. Millions of people have viewed this and have heard what he has to say. I love Joe Rogan. I've watched almost all of his podcasts concerning UFOs with Bob Lazar and Commander David Faber. To me, it's harmless to promote conspiracies about extraterrestrial life or UFOs. But promoting conspiracies about the war in Ukraine is irresponsible when tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people are dying in this war over the Kremlin's lies. So let me play for you a small clip from the Joe Rogan podcast of stuff that RFK Jr. says.
And that NATO would stay out of the Ukraine. And that's what the Russians wanted. A pledge that NATO will never go in, which we should have made for them. We have no business putting NATO in the Ukraine. We promised we'd never do that. We committed to it. And we've repeatedly violated those promises. And there's people in the White House who want this war. They've said it repeatedly. Even President Biden has said the purpose of the war is to depose Vladimir Putin.
So RFK Jr.'s position is that this war is the fault of the United States. The United States engineered and orchestrated everything after promising the Russians that NATO would never expand east. We broke those promises and we provoked the Russians into attacking Ukraine. What promises? Where's the treaty? Show me the treaty where every member state of NATO agreed that NATO would no longer expand east closer to Russia's borders. I don't care if a Secretary of State off the cuff in the 90s casually said to Boris Yeltsin, sure, NATO won't expand. That is not an internationally recognized treaty. There is no legal obligation. A Secretary of State, one, can't make that promise, and two, when we have an election and a different president is elected, all foreign policy changes. The foreign policy of the Obama administration was very different from Bush. Trump was different than Obama. Biden is different than Trump. You've got to get it in writing. You've got to get it signed on a piece of paper for it to be codified into law. So the fact that Russian propagandists and RFK Jr. keep promoting this lie that NATO promised Russia they would never expand east is BS. In addition, NATO is a defensive alliance in which people ask to join. Talk to anyone from Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia. Did the United States, with a gun to your head, force you to join NATO? No. They requested it. They wanted it. They begged to join NATO for protection from the Russians. Same is true for Finland. Why is Finland joining NATO? Is the United States, with our military, forcing them to do it? According to RFK Jr., that's the narrative he's pushing, when in reality, it's a defensive alliance in which every country has to approve additional members. It's completely voluntary, and everyone in Eastern and Central Europe wanted to join for protection from the Russians. So RFK Jr. was also on the Lex Freedman Podcast. This was up 2 days ago. Already has 1 million views. I also really like Lex Freedman. He supports Ukraine, but it's incredibly disappointing that he's platforming this Russian propagandist. Here's a clip from the Lex Freedman podcast.
And who made an unprovoked invasion of the Ukraine. He was provoked, and we were provoking him, for since 1997. And it's not just me that's saying that. I mean, before Putin ever came in, we were provoking Russians in this way unnecessarily. And to go back that time in 1992.
So RFK Jr. is saying the cause of this war, everything that Russia is doing, all the people they're killing, it's the fault of the United States provoking Russia by causing the revolution of dignity. So in 2014, Russia already controlled the state of Ukraine. Their puppet president, Viktor Yanukovych, was ruling the country. And the Ukrainians had a revolution because they were sick of corruption, sick of their government being a puppet state of the Russians. And the people rose up and they elected a new government. Now, the Russian talking point is this was a CIA coup to get rid of the legitimate president of Ukraine who just happened to support Russia. But in no way was this a genuine, authentic revolution from the people of Ukraine wanting to exert their right to self-determination. RFK Jr. believes that Ukraine doesn't have the right to self-determination. If Ukraine wants to join the EU, that's not allowed if Russia doesn't want it. If Ukraine wants to join NATO, that's not allowed if Russia doesn't want it. All of the states of Eastern Europe, the former Soviet republics, they belong to Russia's sphere of influence in perpetuity forever. These people, the people of Belarus, Moldova, Kazakhstan, the Baltics, they don't have a right to self-determination. They belong to the Kremlin in perpetuity forever. That's what basically RFK Jr. is saying. And let's just do one more podcast for fun. RFK Jr. hosts convicted sex predator on his podcast to praise Putin. So here's the tweet. This is from April 9th, 2023. RFK Jr. Listen to my latest podcast on the cost of war with Scott Ritter. I mean, if you watch my channel, if you don't know who Scott Ritter is by now, he's everywhere. He is the Kremlin's biggest mouthpiece on social media in the West. And this guy is a sex offender. A guy running for president, RFK Jr., had a convicted sex predator to promote on his podcast. We're living in a bizarre alternate reality where basic social norms don't matter anymore. How can a guy running for president platform a sex offender and not be told to immediately drop out of the race? So here's an article from October 2011. Ex-UN inspector gets prison in Pennsylvania sex case. Scott Ritter from Del Mar, New York, exchanged explicit sex messages with a detective posing as a 15-year-old girl, then performed a sex act on himself in front of a webcam. And the reason he got prison time is because he was a repeat offender. He had already tried doing this to other underage girls in the past. So yes, Scott Ritter is a veteran. He was a UN safety inspector. But in my opinion, you can't listen to this guy because he's discredited himself. Is there anyone who's not a sex offender that potentially could promote Russia's narrative in the United States? Nope. And here's an article from June of this year. Scott Ritter's mission to Moscow. So Scott Ritter went to Russia for a month to promote his book and make money. Scott Ritter is a mouthpiece for the Kremlin. saying exactly what the Russians want him to say, because obviously he's being paid. He's making millions of dollars promoting this narrative that the United States is evil and Ukraine is a victim and all the people that the Russians are killing in Ukraine, it's the fault of the United States. RFK Jr. loves Scott Ritter. Here's his podcast on Apple Podcast. It's 45 minutes. You can watch a clip of it on YouTube. And let me just share a couple seconds of Scott Ritter being a terrible person.
Taking back a considerable amount of military. But that offensive stopped. It stalled. Why? Because the Russians solidified their lines. The Ukrainian military ran out of steam, lost horrific casualties. All of their offensive striking power was destroyed, basically.
Here's the headline for RFK's podcast. Ukraine is going to lose this war. And Scott Ritter was allowed to say whatever he wanted. And Scott Ritter has been wrong about absolutely everything this entire war. You can go back in time to February and March of last year. You can go back a year. You can go back 6 months. Every time Scott Ritter opens his mouth, he's wrong. But RFK Jr. really likes this guy. Said he'd be happy to have him on the podcast again in the future. So as far as the Kremlin's paid influencer program, Scott Ritter's on the take. That Colonel McDouglas guy is on the take. And of course, the Russians are trying to interfere in the United States presidential election next year. RFK Jr., whether he really believes what he's saying or not, is their guy. And because of the Citizens United Supreme Court case, an infinite amount of dark money can come into our elections, and we'll never know where that money is coming from. Russia's Prigozhin admits interfering in the US elections. Russia has secretly spent $300 million to influence foreign elections. So as long as RFK Jr. is saying exactly what the Kremlin wants him to say, whether he believes it or not, they're going to find a way to get millions of dollars through intermediate groups or whatever to make sure this guy continues talking, continues running for president, continues advertising. And please don't fall for it. If you support Ukraine, you watch my channel. If you see anyone promoting RFK Jr., immediately shut that down. So I'm disappointed that I got a lot of comments such as this. People who watched RFK Jr. on the Joe Rogan podcast or the Lex Freedman podcast, and they thought he was a good guy. They thought stuff he was saying made sense, but no. Don't support this guy. That's all I got for you. If you found this video informative, give me a thumbs up. Best way to support the channel. If you want to share this video with someone that maybe has been persuaded that RFK Jr. is someone they should vote for, share the video. That's all I got for you. In the meantime, continue defending the truth, continue defending democracy.